First of all, hello everyone, and welcome to this session, which is on reducing kitchen waste, food and packaging. My name is Dr. Johnny Drain. I'm a food designer and material scientist. I will be chairing the session, and we have three amazing speakers for you today. In no particular order, we have Wojciech Beck, Colin Hicks, and Andrea Zick. Wojciech is a zero waste and plant-based chef who has gained his 10 years of work experience in some of the greatest restaurants around the world. In 2018, he opened his own zero waste vegan restaurant, which happened to be the first of its kind at the time. After the closure of the restaurant, he moved back to Slovakia, where he now resides and works as a zero waste chef and food waste consultant. He recently wrote his first book called Surplus, the Food Waste Guide for Chefs. Colin is co-founder of Green and Code, a university-led tech accelerator startup, developing tech for good products for pressing issues in our environment. Currently, Green and Code are developing low-cost food waste behavior change solutions that lead to high-impact results. They are currently rolling out their beta testing production models into 5 different types of commercial kitchens and are looking for more beta testers. Finally, Andrea is a chef and nutritionist with an eclectic CV. In her current role, she looks after everything to do with sustainability at the iconic Oxo Tower restaurant, bar and brasserie in London. She worked as a chef at 5-star hotels in Germany and the Four Seasons Group in the UK. And recently she won the Food Hero of the Year award from the Caroline Walker Trust for her work leading teams to cook surplus food for those in need in London during the 2020 coronavirus lockdown. So without further ado, I will kick off with the questions to the three panelists. We will have some time at the end of the session for questions from participants. So you can feel free to put those in the chat box and we will do our best to answer as many of those as we can at the end. So yeah, to kick off, Wojciech, let's go to you. Let's talk a little bit about your book. What motivated you to write your book, Surplus, and can you summarize the top 3 tips regarding food waste from the book?
Yeah, I mean, what motivated me to write the book in the first place was basically from my experience. What I learned in kitchens can be very wasteful in restaurants. And the amount of food waste was often just absurd. And there was very little knowledge between chefs and the staff on how to reduce that, and it was accepted as kind of a standard and normal. And I really wanted to challenge like these old notions and the ideas of how we prepare food and how we work in kitchens, because I do believe that that amount of food waste is not necessary. What is edible, I believe it should be eaten and should be on the plate. Top 3 tips from the book: planning and organizing well the workplace and the station and the menu. And approaching the food waste issue from the point like designing the waste out of the system by adjusting the menu and its dishes, I believe is the one of the most important ways of the prevention rather than reduction. We should prevent the food waste in the first place rather than trying to figure out what to do with it once we have it. And most importantly, using the whole ingredient without any exception, like treating every ingredient like equally. Because like the food that we put in a bin, like all the waste is equals to money too, which is bad for business.
Brilliant, thanks Wojciech. So 3 top tips there were planning and organizing, designing out waste, and then using the whole ingredients. Andrea, could you comment on whether you've used those 3 things or any one of those 3 things within your work at Oxo?
Well, I'd say absolutely. As a very big, large commercial restaurant serving over 3,000 people a week, we can't really waste any small item from the food supply, because a 10p wastage on 3,000 people sums up very, very quickly. And interestingly enough, when Wojciech and me just met, we kind of had a little bit of a conversation, because my view of the chefs is maybe a little bit more positive, but I started my career in the kitchen in 1999, so that's quite a while ago, and in Germany, and we were actually very, very much trained on not wasting food. There wasn't like we cooked the whole meat, whatever meat we would be delivered, we would use the bones to make stocks, etc., etc. And I wonder in how far maybe over the last 20 years things have changed, and we almost have to review how we cook industrially or in the industry, and go back to some of the things we used to do and maybe don't do anymore because we perceive them as not time efficient.
Brilliant. And are you able to comment on what the biggest impact within your work at OXO has been in terms of helping the group reduce their food waste?
Well, for us, it's certainly coming from a partnership with the Sustainable Restaurant Association. We were founding members. So we've committed quite early as a restaurant to do more to make our business sustainable. And that includes aspects of food waste. It's not the only area we would focus on, but because we got this commitment as a business, and we basically are getting audited every year, every 2 years, we then have to ask ourselves quite important questions on how we are doing things and why we are doing them. And that goes back to what Wojtek pointed at, that food waste is ultimately avoidable when you put the right planning and the right thinking behind it. And you can only do that if you're critical with what you're doing in your business. So by working with the Sustainable Restaurant Association and getting these audits done, we have to ask ourselves regularly, are we still achieving what we should be achieving as a business? And that links quite nicely into packaging as well. So as part of our audit with the Sustainable Restaurant Association, we will be asked what type of packaging we are using, how much packaging, how much waste we are producing, be it food waste or be it other waste, how much effort we are putting into recycling. So these are aspects which definitely fall into that category. And then other things which helped us to really reduce food waste and packaging is certainly things like the public outcry after the Blue Planet launch, when literally the public said, we don't want any straws anymore. And obviously anyone working in a restaurant will say, well, actually, is straws really the big problem? I mean, any chef who's cooked in a modern restaurant will know we probably use more vacuum bags than we use straws in a day-to-day basis. And even that goes back to planning. So how much do you put in a vacuum pack? Do you only need to put that one fillet steak in there, or can you put 3 or 4 in there and use less bags? Yes, I'm sure you coming from a material science, you will know that there's obviously now a lot of development creating new products which then help us to solve the plastic wastage problem in different ways, potentially, but we have to be careful with that as well. The other thing which helped us is as well getting our team involved in community projects. So we've done Thames foreshore cleanups. So we are based on the Thames, and when the tide is low, we can actually go to the river and we can see how much plastic pollution there is. And we've actively gotten our team involved in cleaning this up. And the moment you start seeing the waste, you feel very different about it. And that applies to food waste equally.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So I think certainly that the point about auditing and setting objective criteria is something that is really critical and that we'll circle back to later as the discussion unfolds. I'd like to move to you next, Colin. Could you just give us a bit of an overview of what Green and Code is and does, and how it could benefit a restaurant or a bar or somebody within the hospitality ecosystem?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so basically we automate the premise of WRAP, the British charity that was set up by the government to reduce food waste. And they basically developed a system which is online now, which restaurants can join as well, which is called Guardians of the Grub, and you can join that. And you can basically, they reduce food waste by using, separating your food waste into different streams. And then you record that food waste in different tables, and you can, when you've got weekly readings of that waste, you can actually try to look at where the waste is coming from and correlate that waste with your menus. So instead of doing this manually, we automate this whole process. So we place different, very simple tech weighing machines beneath your bins, beneath your different waste stream, food waste stream bins. And then we measure and give you information and of the weight of your waste, but we also give you the information of how that actually correlates to money that you're losing in the bin. And we also give them information of their CO2 related impact on that waste. And what we're trying to do is automate this process as cheaply as possible, specifically for SMEs, whereby they've had no tools, they've had no real change in their kitchens, where it hasn't changed from a labor managed system where everyone in the kitchen is looking at their own spoilage and food waste. And we want to try and give them these tools, which is very, very cheap, to make a big impact on the way that they're actually where that waste is coming from, how they can change their behavior in relatively real time to know what they can do to reduce that waste. Basically, it's kind of like what Wojtek was saying in the beginning, what he was stressing about where the waste is coming from. And obviously it's unnecessary waste. We're trying to guide them and give them very hardcore figures about where that waste is coming from. And perhaps what we can do as well is we can take their inputs and we can correlate their waste against different menus and things of that nature. So we're trying to give real-time information to change their waste in a very cheap, practical way.
Brilliant. And so the upside for the SMEs who you're working with is that they're going to save money as well as doing something positive for the planet. I wonder, could you just dive a little bit deeper into, you said you separate it into these different types of waste streams. Could you just elaborate on what those are, where they occur within the kitchen?
Yeah, I mean, it's all common knowledge within, from the SRA to RAP, that the major big waste streams are normally your preparation waste, your plate waste from your customers, and you've got your spoilage waste as well. Probably what isn't so known among the industry is the fact that the food that you're putting in the bin is not just that type of food. You've also got to think about the waste of your water, the waste of your energy in cooking that food that's going in the bin. You've also got to think about the labor that you're paying someone to cook the food, and then their food is going in the bin, which sounds a bit odd. And then you're also paying for it to be taken away, which it all doesn't, if you break it down like that, it sounds nonsensical that you wouldn't try to reduce your waste, because basically the food waste in your bin is a big part of that. Nearly half of it is the cost of it is from your labor. So you've got to imagine that you're paying your staff to cook food that literally goes in the bin. It doesn't make any sense.
So I suppose the good news from that is that, well, the bad news is that there's food waste occurring at almost every part within a hospitality business. But the good news is that there's lots of opportunities for us to step in and think of innovative ways to reduce and mitigate that food waste. Now, obviously, what we're talking about is, plates going out to customers, and when you're sat in a restaurant as a customer, what I'm seeing is the menu. So let's just talk about how restaurants can curate and design their menus to try to mitigate some of that food waste. Perhaps go to you first, Wojtek. Is there a way as a chef that you can reduce food waste simply by designing a menu in a certain way?
Absolutely, and that is the single one biggest thing in a restaurant, I would say, because as I said before, I mean, the food is it's either gonna be wasted or it's gonna be on a plate. So it's the best thing that you are buying food to sell it. So you want to make sure that you maximize the use of every ingredient that you have in the kitchen. And you can do that by like using different preparation techniques, such as like drying, fermenting, or pickling, which is like basically like a shelf extending techniques. So you can like maximize every ingredient. And also like, I like to call it like a circular menu kind of thing, you know, like when you use like one part of the ingredient, maybe on a starter and the other part on the main course, and you like cross using ingredients on a menu. So you can really make the most of it, what you have. And this is something that I'm doing all the time. I did it before, and it's just been proven by the time that it's the smartest way to avoid food waste once it's, you know, like just design it into the dish.
I mean, so, you know, some restaurant owners or bar owners might come and say, well, actually, our customers want choice on our menu. Do you think they just imagine that, or do you think there is this actual demand for choice? How does a restaurant owner or a head chef navigate that?
I think it's partly true, because customers do want choice, but they don't want an overwhelming choice again, you know? So you want to keep like the choice within your concept, obviously. So it's something that like belongs to the restaurant and the kitchen that you prepare. And I also kind of think like the head chefs and the staff in hospitality has some sort of authority over the customer. So I think that we actually have the power, or we should tell them like what is right to have on a menu, and why are we doing what we are doing, rather than listening all the time to what people ask for and they eventually not ordering it after all altogether. You know, so I think if we set the tone in the restaurant and to the menu, so what belongs to the menu, what makes sense there, I never had a complaint that customers couldn't choose, even if there were only 10 dishes. If it's like a 10 well-cooked dishes that make sense in that particular restaurant, then I think it's like absolutely right, and that is all you need.
Brilliant. So this idea of like, you know, chefs or restaurateurs communicating why the menu is the way it is.
You must talk to your customers, yeah. Like communicate in a correct way, like why you do what you do.
Absolutely, 100% agreed. And actually, I'm someone who suffers from choice paralysis when I'm faced with a menu with too many options.
Everyone does. I think it's like general. people do that.
They do. Andrea, could you perhaps talk about, you know, how within OXO you and the team go about maximizing this, you know, each ingredient?
Yes, of course. We had a few kind of hero dishes, I would say, on the menu. There's one which springs to mind, which was the pork terrine, which one of our chefs created. A beautiful dish made with some of the lesser wanted parts of the pork belly, which kind of were left over when we did the pork crackling for another dish. So he then created a pork terrine. I don't know if anyone ever had a dish which is a typical Italian dish, which is like a pork foot, like a poached pork foot. It was very similar to that. It was very inspired by that. So he used that, created this beautiful terrine, and then he also he made a kimchi from the cauliflower leaves, which I think went onto that same dish, because at that point we were serving a homemade piccalilli in our afternoon tea, and the cauliflower leaves were always the unwanted ingredient. But if you think about the head of a cauliflower, I'd say it's about maybe a quarter of the cauliflower in some cases of the leaves which we receive. Obviously, that's not even all the leaves that cauliflower ever had. So if you've ever harvested a cauliflower, there's way more leaves around that cauliflower than what we receive in the kitchen. And if we throw away that quarter of a cauliflower, that's a lot of money, which we are actually not using. And more coming from a different angle, thinking about the nutritional content. Back in my days when I studied nutrition, I always wondered, so where are the different nutrients in a plant? There are different nutrients in some of the, like in the leaves than in the cauliflower. So why would we, with any sense, throw away these nutrients, which we ultimately want, right? So by making the most of the leaves, the roots of a plant, we're going to actually achieve so much more. And I'm sure Wojtek will just echo that. Also, the textures of the different parts of a plant or of an animal will be totally different. The flavors will be different. So you can actually create so much more if you're cooking with the whole ingredient than if you're avoiding that one part of that ingredient, which seems to be difficult to deal with. So it really requires, I guess, it goes back to management, but it also requires the ability to experiment, the ability for the chef to take time away from that 10-hour service they sometimes have to do, and get downtime and to think about what they actually can achieve with that ingredient if they rethink the way they currently cook a certain dish. So yeah, definitely a few hero ingredients. We also done a treacle tart from bread crumbs and bread dumplings. So there's a number of dishes which automatically pop into my head.
Brilliant. And you know, perhaps as certainly within the UK, as restaurants start reopening in some altered form with coronavirus, this might actually be a time where, you know, chefs can reconsider, and restaurants and restaurant groups can reconsider actually how they operate, and perhaps integrate some of these practices into their menus and into their operations. Maybe we could do some questions on that later. But you know, so I'd like to move on now to this idea of how do we actually measure that waste, whether it's the waste that's come off the plate or it's the waste that's been created by the chefs as they prep earlier on in the day, or the packaging waste, etc. You know, Colin, could you just unpack for the audience, how does one go about measuring waste within a kitchen or a hospitality setting?
As I said, I mean, most of the kitchens that we work with, they've all got their brilliant labor managed systems. It's almost run like an army, whereby everyone knows their job and they're all aiming to manage their waste, whether it be spoilage, whether they're recording in their ledgers the different types of waste streams. And you know, you've got the waste coming from the kitchen, which are the two big waste streams of spoilage and preparation of your menus. And then you've got the waste coming from either a rotisserie outside or the plate waste from the customer. So really measuring those streams and working out what you can do for each of them. So as Wojtek was saying, like, menu planning is really important. If you've got your preparation waste and a lot of your prep waste is going in the bin, could it not, as Andrew was saying as well, could it not be used in other dishes, things of that nature? You know, so it's more about, we give people the warnings, you know, to tell them, are they actually doing enough? Why is that waste gone in the bin? You know, we can alarm them to that. And we try to set them on the right path to circularity of their ingredients. In terms of plate waste, obviously you're looking at portion control. You're also looking at, you can correlate your menus across your waste, knowing that a specific menu is causing you a lot of waste doesn't make that much sense to us, because obviously there's an intrinsic kind of message there that people don't like that menu. So you know, being aware of all of these things in a real time frame, and having that ability to get all of that information, which is very accurate, and being able to act on that within a reasonable time period of a week rather than a month, means perhaps you can save up to you can do at least twice or 3 times or 4 times as much in terms of reusing your ingredients, and also making sure that your menus, that the food that you're serving isn't a big contributor to what's going in the bin as well. So I think that's really important.
So I suppose, you know, for a lot of restaurateurs and restaurants, that upfront labor cost is what might prevent them or put them off from implementing these systems. And then there's, you know, there's a training cost, and then an upkeep cost of having some members of your staff carry out these duties week in and week out, or a day in and day out. By the sounds of it also, if these things are labor driven, there's probably quite a lot of idiosyncrasies in the way that they're being carried out from restaurant to restaurant. So they're not standardized, I'm imagining. Is that something that you're trying to address? And is there an upside, is there a benefit from standardizing those measurement techniques?
I think giving people the ability to act fast on their food waste makes a huge difference to what they're doing now. Because as I mentioned briefly, that the systems that they're currently having in most kitchens, when they're monitoring within their own teams to do this, I think they can't act on it within a reasonable time frame. And also they're not measured that accurately as well. So I think giving people the assistance to look at their waste in real time, which is what we and our competitors do. And the difference between us and our competitors is that we're looking at solutions which do not cost a lot of money, which are reasonable charges. And we feel that the gains from using our systems outweigh their costs dramatically. We could easily, whatever charge we're charging them can easily be offset by the value of the efficiency of reduction of their food waste, and also the fact that they are reusing their ingredients in different ways. I think that's what we're trying to do, and I think it's definitely the right thing to do now as well, due to COVID, due to the environmental pressures that we'll all become aware of, and also due to the fact that SMEs want to try and make us maximize their efficiency as well. So that's a good reason to incorporate a new way of managing your waste.
Excellent. And perhaps Andrea, you're running sustainability operations at a group that has, I think you said, serves 3,000 people a week. Could you just comment on how some of that measurement functions within your business?
Well, I think the one thing, and Colin touched on it, but he may have not shouted it out as directly, you have to get everyone in your business involved. You can't just give it to one person in the business. That's impossible. And with a bigger business such as ours, even more so. So you need to engage your waiters to look at the plates when they are coming back, and even have a conversation with the guests to find out, what's the reason why they are leaving these potato chips on there, or a piece of meat, or whatever it might be. Not in a kind of judgmental way, but in an explorative way, because maybe we got it wrong. Maybe we are putting too much chips on the plate, or maybe the steak was tough, and if the steak was tough, then this is a service issue anyway. So we need to get our front of house team involved. We need to get, in our case, we get our kitchen porters involved, and they actually do a lot of the measuring, and it's almost like a upskilling opportunity, because kitchen porters are often the, let's say, most low-skilled people in a restaurant. And if you can get them an opportunity to show that they are capable of more responsibility, you can then start working with them and potentially work them into different roles. And weighing food or food waste and separating it is quite an important aspect, as we all agree. It's a financial impact beyond the environmental impact it stands for. So yes, absolutely, you have to bring everyone in the business into that. We were lucky enough to work with partners, first the Sustainable Restaurant Association, and now we are part of the program Colin mentioned, the Guardians of Grub. And through that, we had a lot of support, and I think there is a lot of support for restaurants out there. A lot of the support is free of charge. So you don't really need to make it incredibly complicated. The moment you choose to measure waste, sometimes it just requires a see-through container, which is put in the kitchen and is being said, put all the waste you're creating in this container, and by the end of the day, you're getting your team, how big or how small it might be, together, and you're looking at what you've just created as waste, and ask yourself a very honest and heartful question: would we have been able to do something with this? And when you start doing that on a regular basis, I think it shifts mindsets.
Brilliant. So yeah, what we're talking about there is a real shift of mindset and a change of behavior from within companies, and then that's manifesting and spreading out externally to anybody that steps into the restaurant. Wojciech, I know you talk in your book about a sort of zero waste mindset, I think you term it. Could you just tell us what does that look like, or what is that to you, and how have you managed to get teams within restaurants to adopt that?
Zero waste mindset is basically kind of a mindset that we all have in some sorts, because I write about a particular idea of having a black chocolate mindset in my book. which means basically treating every ingredient as it would be a black truffle. Because when you have like expensive black truffles in the kitchen, then you really make sure that you use every single part and every little crumb of the black truffle. You keep it very well in a very, very good storage. You handle it very carefully, and you make sure that you don't waste anything from it. So you basically have the zero waste mindset already. You just need to apply a bit more widely to like all the ingredients and like treat them more equally too. So this is one of the ideas of like how to like what is a zero waste mindset basically, and adapting that. I think that it comes from a good leadership and having the right motivation for in the staff. So it's really like if you set the example as a manager or a head chef or executive, then people will follow, because essentially people imitate the actions of the other people that they are surrounded with. So it always starts from within, and it always starts from the top. I'd say, like as Andrea said, it's never should be only one person that's doing all the job, but you need a good team leader or a good leadership that will set an example, and others will follow suit eventually.
And I think actually, I mean, it points towards what Andrea said earlier about her training as a chef in Germany, but that idea of not wasting things, I think, has long been or was long ingrained within most sorts of kitchen cultures and cook and chef training. I remember being sort of ragged out by a chef when I didn't scrape all of I think it was a Jerusalem artichoke puree into a container in, I think, what was the second restaurant that I ever worked at, and I never forgot being sort of shouted at about that.
I think it was something that that was like a standard at some point before, but then we kind of forgot about it, as Andrea mentioned to you before, and then we just like jumped into this new standard of like, yeah, like we just order more, we have so many products, like the abundance of the products that we have, and then we all of a sudden we are wasting so many ingredients and just like accepting it as a new normal. We don't need to learn like anything brand new. We just need to like get back to like what we've been doing at some point before.
I also think what we may have forgotten is what is part of that other of that ingredient we are getting. So specifically at OXO, because we don't have a butcher in-house, so we get a lot of pre-butchered items. So that means if we get a beef fillet, obviously there is a lot of other parts of this beef which we haven't gotten. So what happens to that? And as someone who actually is dependent on the food supply chain and is dependent on the environment this animal grows in and should grow in future, we ought to ask ourselves the question, what's happening with the rest of this beef, and how can we as food business help that this other part of this animal is being used and sold and appreciated by the public as much as this fillet steak, I think.
Definitely. So, I mean, I know that importance of the supply chain from my own work with Doug McMaster at Silo in London. Colin, perhaps you could step in here and talk about, you know, obviously it's probably, or it seems to me that it's easier to measure or review the waste that's happening in front of your eyes within a kitchen. Is it more difficult to ascertain what the level of that waste is when we're talking about, like Andrea just said, the bit of the cow or the pig that didn't actually make it to your restaurant? How do you go about measuring that or dealing with it?
I'd say that's it's very difficult to talk about what Andrea is saying about the. I mean, obviously, if it's not coming into your establishment, it'd be very difficult to measure it. So I'm not sure how you do that. But I mean, there is a benefit of having the whole animal maybe in your kitchen as well. I don't know. I mean, my expertise is not in the menus and what you do with that. My expertise is just looking at how we can radically change people's behavior to make them aware of what they're not doing perhaps and what they could do to maximize their own profit margins, but to also reduce the waste of their labor and their energy in that waste that goes in the bin. Sorry.
Brilliant. So yeah, I mean, I think that speaks to, I know from my experience of what they do, what Doug does at Silo is have very close relationships with the producers. So whatever is coming into the kitchen, they know more or less what's happening at the farm or the abattoir before that product has come in. So if black truffle mindset is one of the catchphrases of the session, know thy producer might be a second one. So let's move on now to talk about, actually what sorts of techniques are people using in kitchens to, maximize the use of ingredients and make better use of some things that might otherwise have gone to waste. Wojciech, can you, talk about how you turn something that people wouldn't normally eat or think of eating into something delicious that they might see on a menu and go, hey, I really want to order that?
If you as a chef have no experience with working that particular ingredient, then I say like keep experimenting and work with it as long as it's super tasty, because essentially that's what matters. Once it's on a plate, it's just got to be like super tasty, and people won't care even if it's something that they will never put in their mouth. Maybe just don't even tell them, because I sometimes don't mention like every single ingredient on the menu. You don't need to mention it, even if it's the main part of the main flavor. It doesn't have to be there if you feel like it's something that could put people off. You just leave it out and like tell them in the end as a surprise, maybe. But I always I try to look at the ingredients, like maybe like use like techniques like, I don't know, like marinating, for example, or like rehydrating ingredients, or like all kind of different things that perhaps you never tried before. But the guiding thing in here should be for me, or is it for me, is the flavor. Like with every dishes that you put on a menu, you always make sure it's tasty. So if you come across the ingredients that you are a bit worried whether it's gonna sell, just keep testing and keep tasting as much as you can to make sure that it's really like a bang on dish. And then once it's on the menu, I don't think it's gonna be especially if you have like a good front of house team that can communicate well with the customers, and like they can like sell it to them without like making them feel like bad about like what they're gonna eat. So this is also like a big thing to communicate well, also between chefs and the front of house, so they know what they are selling, and then the front of house passing that information on to the customers, which are essentially making that decision mostly on what is recommended to them.
Absolutely. I mean, I've seen, even when we're not talking about ingredients that might be a bit weird and wonderful, I've seen restaurants where if the front of house team can't talk eloquently and knowledgeably about the food, then a certain dish will not sell, because consumers just might not understand quite what it is or what they're going to be eating, and that's obviously of huge importance. Andrea, could you, are there examples within OXO of ways that you use produce that might be, hasn't spoiled yet, but is nearing the end of its sort of optimal life? Are there techniques that the chefs use to do that?
We had, I think that was actually before lockdown, but it links to lockdown quite nicely. For some reason, we had a glut of milk, and the milk was due to come off, and we only order organic and fresh milk. So obviously there wasn't much we could have done, but potentially dropping it down the drain, and that was certainly not what we wanted. So we've got a very handy pastry chef who said, let us try to make cheese with the milk. And I'm sure you, having associations with Silo, you have come across that. It's actually a pretty easy thing to do. You don't need much training and knowledge. It requires a bit of vinegar and the right temperature. And actually, that's pretty much what chefs can do anyways. They know how to bring something to the right temperature these days anyways. So video cooking is almost a kind of scientific approach to cooking. So yeah, she basically made cheese. It was paneer-like, and while we didn't put it onto the menu for our customers, we served it for our staff, and they were actually extremely happy, and they loved the dish. So there are things you can actually do. You can pickle things when you see they are starting to come off. But it goes back to good stock management, and also asking yourself, at what point do I need to order what? Yes, I'm sure any restaurant in the whole of the UK will agree, when lockdown hit in March last year, we all suddenly sat on quite a lot of food. We've worked for years with organizations such as City Harvest, which are basically rescuing surplus food before it goes off, and they're redistributing it. We also work with an organization or a business called Too Good To Go, which we specifically use for our afternoon tea. I don't know how many people like afternoon tea, but afternoon tea sandwiches dry out very quickly. And that means that most places which serve afternoon tea will make these sandwiches daily for the right reason. But what happens to any of the uneaten, not used afternoon tea sandwiches? And Too Good To Go seems to be our perfect solution to that. We sell the afternoon tea at a very heavily discounted price in a takeaway box. There, we don't actually make money of it. The money we are taking, we put into a pot and we give it to charity, depending on what charity we are supporting. Previously, Street Smart, which is a homeless charity. So you can actually sometimes generate real value from surplus food to the community and also to the business or to other organizations.
Brilliant. So I love this idea that where that food waste, when it gets saved or reimagined, it doesn't have to go ping pong back out onto the plates of the consumers. It can go to other avenues, whether that's the community or the restaurant staff themselves. And as you said, with the example of the paneer, the restaurant staff might be very happy that they're eating something slightly new. Obviously, fermentation is a great way of saving some things that are close to their best before dates, etc., close to spoilage. And that's a kind of very ancient preservation technique that lots of people are embracing. I think now what we'll do is move on just to talk a little bit about packaging with respect to that idea of spoilage. So, how something comes into the kitchen and how it is stored has a huge effect on its shelf life. Wojciech, perhaps you could talk about, is there such a thing as zero waste packaging? I mean, it's a bit of an oxymoron, because if, inherently packaging normally gets thrown away, is there a way to navigate that space in a sustainable way?
But anything that's single use can't be zero waste at the same time, essentially. So if you have a packaging like as sustainable as possible, then like try to get as close to it as much as you can. It's never gonna be zero waste, but maybe it also doesn't have to be, because like 1%, 2% waste, tiny bit of waste, acceptable. If it's something that is recyclable or something that is completely compostable, even in the home conditions, then that is perfect. The ultimate zero waste packaging is no packaging at all. And achieving that is only comes with building good relationship with the suppliers, because I mean that is the only options that you have basically. And if you aren't able to get like your ingredients and food without packaging, that's mostly like veg and fruits and from stuff from the farm, then that is the best that you can do basically. Because like it was really hard work also in Cambodia to do that, but I managed to get my herbs wrapped in lotus leaves, for example. I like delivered everything in like a palm woven basket. But like I get it, like it's not something that perhaps you can't do in London, like it's just not available. So you should be always looking at like cooking everything from scratch as much as possible, like trying to make everything homemade. That's like like preserving stuff and like maybe like jams, and also like dairy items as much as you can, like do everything on your own. Just create it in the kitchen. That reduces your waste heavily, because right now I don't think that the world system is set for the zero waste packaging ideas. It's just oftentimes it's not possible at all.
Yeah, so you touched on the idea that where you are in the world will dramatically influence how able you are to reduce that packaging, but then also the scale and size of your restaurant. So whether if you're a 60-seater or 40-seater restaurant, serving just like dinner, that's very different to if you're serving 3,000 meals a week. Andrea, have you had any major successes that you could point towards in terms of getting your suppliers to drop off food with less packaging?
we try again is the start. So we get a lot of our fruit and vegetable in the standard gastro plastic reusable boxes, and we return them. So there's certainly kind of a circularity in that context. We try to really think about where packaging comes from. We get a lot of our drinks, so all the wine, all the water, all the drinks which we are serving, and that's a lot obviously, via central storage. And again, we are reusing a lot of the boxes. We are reusing the fillers, which are often like styrofoam fillers. We are collecting them and we're sending them back. That's possible because we have a central storage. So it's a unique solution to us. But I'd argue, if you really ask question to the packaging and why it's there in the first place, you can progressively start working out what packaging is unnecessary or what could it be replaced by. I've spent half a year in our business trying to overcome plastic milk bottles. I didn't succeed, but I don't feel worse about it because I learned a lot along the way. I learned a lot about why pergolas are efficient for some places and not for others. Whether Tetra Paks are better than the milk plastic bottles. So sometimes the outcome might not be the ultimate success, but through going on this journey, you learn so much. And I'm guessing, I mean, you've studied, I think, material science. So I guess that exploration sometimes is almost more important than necessarily a positive outcome.
Absolutely. And I guess where a scientist might be easily able to kind of understand what you're saying there is just that very fundamental thing of asking, why do we do this thing in this particular way? And can we do it better? And whether you're a physicist or a chemist or a material scientist, that's essentially where you attack most problems from. I wonder, Colin, if you could close out this part of the talk just by commenting on, have you seen any trends within that packaging or reduction of the amount of packaging with the clients that you've worked with so far?
I'd say it's a lot easier in a rural area to work with your local suppliers than it is in my belief, than it is possibly in London. So, I mean, a lot of the farmers deliver their vegetables into the restaurants, which you probably won't see in London. So I'm based in Cornwall, so it's very rural. So a lot of the companies that we know and work with, they've either got the land to produce a lot of their vegetables, a lot of their own composting is done on their own land. So there tends to be less waste. They're also very active in using their pallets and making sure that that the farmers pick them back up and things of that nature. I think it's a lot possibly easier in the rural areas, maybe in big cities, because they're relatively close to, they're not so far away from the restaurants who are ordering their products as well.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Yes, I think this very thorny problem of like how do urban spaces dictate how restaurants, or in fact any other businesses, operate, and their ability to operate sustainably is of critical importance. So I think at that point we can actually wrap up the panel talk part of the session. We did have the Jamboard that we could do, but I think in the interests of time, we can now switch to questions from the participants. So whether we read these from the chat or whether people want to step up and unmute and ask a question out loud to the panel. If you want to ask a question out loud, if you unmute yourself now and perhaps put your video on, and I can come to you. And in the meantime, I will just have a look to see whether we have any questions on the chat box. So Yeah, Johnny Edwards asks, what's your thoughts on delivery vehicles now that companies are choosing more local suppliers? It increases the number of suppliers, meaning instead of one large truck, we now get, for example, 5 small vans on the road, which might increase CO2 emissions and congestion, etc. So one of the three of you want to attack that?
I can happily talk about that. Since we are lucky enough to work very closely with our local business improvement district, they've done some quite leading and groundbreaking work on air pollution levels in the South Bank area. And on the back of it, they realized they really have to do something about the number of cars accessing the areas. And they've started now on a very small scale, so I don't want to make it sound too big. They've started bringing in a pedal bike, which can be hired out. And they are looking, as far as I understand, at a place to build where all deliveries for the area for several businesses will be dropped off. And then you get them delivered on Velo, on bicycles to your area. So that's one of the things. But it's also small things. How many Amazon orders do you place as a business? Can you place them together? It often requires just the willingness of several people in the business to see it as a problem. I remember just before Christmas, obviously not last Christmas, but the Christmas before, our local business improvement district did a little bit of a campaign informing us how much more traffic we're going to receive in this area if everyone orders one Amazon parcel, which is a gift for someone, to their work address, instead of thinking to potentially pick that up on the work or from the way to work, or to potentially bring it all together in one delivery. So it's small changes which can have a huge impact accumulated over time.
And again, there, really what we're talking about is a question of communication. And I think that's if you look at how efficient kitchens are run, communication between the KP up to the head chef or the exec chef is of critical importance to a well-run kitchen. So there's something maybe that other parts of the business could learn from the actual kitchen team there in terms of effective lines of communication. Let's go to a question. Helen Barrett in the chat box asked, how do we incorporate customer choice in menu development over portion size or side dishes without making the menu more confusing? So I think there's the idea of, how do you make this, how do you make it appealing to customers without increasing the number of menu items or overwhelming the consumers with choice? Wojciech, perhaps you could answer that.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, try to use one ingredient in multiple different ways. So take one product and try to create as many different little products from it as possible and use it in a different ways. And if you cross using the ingredient across multiple dishes on the menu, then you avoid the situation when you have too much of one ingredient in one dish, which makes it kind of boring or unnecessary. So it's either something and also preserve items. So if you come across as part of ingredient or something that you are unable to use or just feel that doesn't belong to the menu right now, then preserve it in the best way that you can. So maybe use it for a later menu or use it for a specials, use it for I don't know, staff dishes, or use it in any other way. But we do that also in the restaurant I work at right now, where we have a huge fermentation box, where if we have any trimmings or any particular items that we feel doesn't belong to the menu of this season, we just preserve it, and then we have a bunch of fermented products for the next season, which essentially helped, we just achieved the same goal basically without putting too much on one dish.
Brilliant. Welcome, Helen. I can see you turned on your video. Would you like to ask an additional question or comment on that?
It was a question to just clarify that, really. It's more to do with plate waste. So the idea of the salad garnish on the side of a dish, just decoratively, some people enjoy it, others it's just ignored and it's straight into the bin. And that could be the same if you'd got 2 vegetable side dishes and somebody likes one. Some people will say, could I swap it, or please don't put it on? But some people don't like to, and that's, again, straight into the bin. So it's the idea of, how do you say to people, do you want a larger portion or a smaller portion? And do you want the side salad garnish, or do you not want the side salad garnish, when they've already got a big menu of choices in front of them to get through? Is that a good idea or not a good idea, in other words?
I think that as chefs or as people in this business, like I think we should be the ones that decide for the customers in some way. So when you build a menu, you should really like go through the portions and feel like is this something that is it satisfying on its own, that particular dish? So and just do that. And if you really like want to offer side portions or like extra sizes, then make them pay extra. Like just put it in a particular place on the menu where they have to like there's extra charge for that if they wish to have more. In that way, you can, I think it like really ensuring that when they order it, they will actually eat it. And if they don't want it, they're not gonna have it. They're not gonna pay for it.
I think it's an interesting one because obviously, technology is enabling some of that personalization to become more accessible. So if you go into, I don't know, Wagamama's springs to mind immediately, where you can sort of order on a touchscreen in Wagamama's now, and you could select, okay, actually I don't want that side dish or I don't want that salad garnish. But ultimately, it comes down to how capable is the kitchen of dealing with these highly personalized and somewhat different orders. And anybody that's worked in a kitchen knows that they can be very busy, hectic places, and you don't want, probably most kitchens couldn't deal with lots of personalized orders going out of the kitchen. Andrea or Colin, do you have any follow-ups to that idea of personalizing dishes to reduce food waste?
I think for me, it's absolutely down to the front of house stuff to build relationships and interact with the guests. And it's fine skill to have a negotiation with the guest without the guest realizing that you are actually trying to do what is good for the business and hopefully will also be good for the customer. So in my opinion, if you have very well trained front of house staff, you can tackle quite a few of these issues. In our case, we do a lot forward thinking as well in our booking process. We haven't even touched on bookings. So just managing your bookings effectively has a huge impact on your food waste. If you know how many bookings you're going to have in a day, you can organize your orders around it. I mean, we in the kitchen, we often forget that this is such a key thing because why we deal with it every day. But if your booking team is not doing the right job, you're going to struggle. So our reservations team will often confirm how many vegetarians are in that group, or they will ask, are there any kind of allergens within the requirements? Would you like a cake? Would you not like a cake? So there's a lot of questions we ask before the guest is even in the business. And that then allows us obviously to pick up conversations when they're in the restaurant on a totally different level, because we will know already quite a bit about that particular dining group, and that will help us to have certain conversations in a very different way. So yeah, I think front of house plays a key role here. I like to say the challenge here is that obviously front of house teams are driven by service charge, and I personally think service charge is one of the areas which potentially drives food waste. It's a contentious issue and a lot of people may not want to talk about it. But I do think service charge is something we have to acknowledge is a driver for upselling, and upselling ultimately can be a driver of plate waste. So you have to, as a business as well, find the balance. How much upselling do you actually want without creating food waste?
And that's also where you sort of might see a race to the moon on portion sizes, right? The bigger the portion, the more you can charge for it. Therefore, the bigger your service charge and your GP. Okay, we have like one more minute, but a question just came in from Erica. So if everyone's happy, we'll just do this question quickly, and then we'll close out the session. But Erica asks, how do you communicate externally about your activities towards reducing, managing food waste within your other brand communications? I guess probably Andrea or Wojciech, that's most naturally answerable by.
Thank you, Wojciech. We have a PR and marketing team who do the hard thinking for us. In my role, I obviously track a lot of the data. I look at how the projects are going, which gives them the insight really for what they're going to communicate to the guests. The interesting thing though is, and as upsetting as this might sound, customers, when they're in the restaurant, they don't really want to hear the sustainability messages. They want to celebrate, they want to enjoy themselves, they don't want to think about all the hard work we put in behind the scenes to make their dish as sustainable as possible, or as limited with food waste attached and plastic waste attached as possible. So I think you have to choose the moment you're communicating with your customers, and it shouldn't be necessarily when they're with you in the restaurant. Yes, you should be open to the conversation if they are asking that while they're there, but I don't think many customers want to hear that while they are dining, when they're celebrating their 50th birthday, which they couldn't for the last year.
And I mean, that's why food is so much like sort of theater and or opera or ballet. When you go, you don't want to know what the training regime of the ballerina was, or what diet they're on, or who broke their metatarsal 3 months ago. You just want to sit down and enjoy yourself. So, as restaurateurs and people working hospitality, that idea of the experience of the customer has to be always at the forefront of our minds. So let's draw to a close the session today. Thank you for the great questions. Thank you to our 3 amazing panelists, Wojciech Weg, who wrote the book Surplus, the Food Waste Guide for Chef, Colin Higgs, who is the co-founder of Green & Code, and Andra Zick, who is looks after sustainability at the Oxo Tower Restaurant Bar and Brasserie in London. I think you can contact all of those people if you have additional questions. And yeah, just to say thank you for an enjoyable and stimulating and important discussion today.
Thank you,
Thank you, Johnny.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.